Good morning, Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're coming to the end of our study of the Beatitudes. We're going to be looking at the last and the lengthiest Beatitude today, and then next time we will just summarize, I think, what we have learned from the Beatitudes, or start to anyway. The Beatitudes, as we have said every day of this study, are given to us at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount so that we put on the glasses through which we see clearly the world as it is and who we are in it as God's people. And until we can do this, we can't really even start to read the rest or listen to the rest of the sermon and in any way allow it to have its work on us. We have to change the way we see things. We have to see the world as God sees it, as Jesus sees it, through the lens of Jesus' own sacrifice. And many have seen, in the first person who mentioned this to me, and then I started looking at it and researching it, and she recognized it on her own. And there are others who have made this point as well. Is Trish Johnson, who pointed out to me that she believes that the Beatitudes progress, So we start out with recognition of our own need. If we don't recognize that, we can't move on to the next, that which is verse 4. And then our posture of submission follows that self-awareness in verse 5. And then, when we understand that, we have a need for righteousness. And I see that too. Not clearly enough to try to flesh that out for you, but I think you'll see it as well. If that is the case, then the most challenging of the Beatitudes and how we know we have reached the point where we can move on, that we're through junior high and we can matriculate up to high school, is when we completely embrace this last beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kind of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, because in this way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now let me say this. As we read the book of Acts, we read about Peter and Paul being arrested by Peter and John being arrested by the Sanhedrin, Paul and Silas being locked up in the inner prison and latched into a torture device in Philippi. And we read the reaction of these men when it was happening. They rejoiced that they were counted worthy. Paul and Silas are singing songs at midnight when they're literally fastened into a torture device. And so they took this seriously, and it was exactly the experience they had. And we know why Paul felt that way, because he tells us in the Philippian letter, the letter he wrote to the church in the town where he was tortured in this way. And he says in Philippians chapter 3 that he has given up everything for the possibility of knowing Jesus. And he says, literally, I want to have the full Jesus experience. I want to be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ. The righteousness, the righteousness that depends on faith, that I may know him and the power of his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, that by any means possible I may attain the resurrection from the dead. I want to know Jesus completely. I want to suffer like Jesus. I want to die like Jesus. And of course, he did die for Jesus, not exactly like Jesus, because he was beheaded as a Roman citizen and not crucified, as Peter was in all likelihood. But we understand the impulse, the feeling of people who take discipleship seriously. If I'm going to walk in Jesus' shoes and I want to walk in his footsteps. I want to walk the entire length of his journey, which means to be falsely accused, to be persecuted, and to be executed. And if that happens to me, it means closer communion with Jesus. And that in itself is a blessing. It's so counterintuitive for us, especially those of us who have been raised in relative safety and provision, so that we did not worry about armies coming down the street, or if we were going to be able to have food on the table for supper. It's so counterintuitive for us to think that it's a good thing to be denied creature comforts, let alone the essentials of life. We are in a culture where we know what our rights are, and we're going to insist upon our rights. And so this is so counterintuitive for us to think this way, but we better start thinking this way, because Jesus says that's the way it has always been, and that's the way it's always going to be. This connects you with past, present, and future. This brings you into fellowship, not only with me, but with Abraham, but with Moses, but with the prophets, and with the apostles who came after me, with everyone who has been God's, who is God's now, and whoever will be God's. We are all joined by this experience, and if you reject it, you reject all of us, and all of it. You just do. And so we better embrace this if we're going to want to move on and learn the rest of the things he has to say in the Sermon on the Mount. Well, thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes. I'm Barry Bryson, and we'll see you next time.